to adjust this a little bit. Bring it down. Okay. I apologize for the delay. I've not set this up quite yet. Okay, we're working. Okay, welcome. Really quick, before I begin, I want to kind of get an idea of where you guys are coming from. How many of you are in Dr. Kosbar's class right now? Okay, it's usually not that many. He tries to sell it like you guys can get a point, and it is worth a point. And it's if you want to go into this, you find it interesting. But a lot of them will just study on their own. And I'll talk about this later. If you guys find me boring, you can leave. I'm not going to be offended. What I want to see you guys do is study on your own, and I'll give you all the tools to do that. So as we go through the slides today, I'll show you some quick tools you can use to study on your own. Okay, a little bit about me. I'm the president of the Amateur Radio Club here on campus, W0EEE. We have our own radio room, and we have our own repeater set up on campus. We do a few events throughout the week, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. I try to have you guys at least be a little bit part of our club or know what's going on with our club. I'm also a research assistant at the Applied Microwave Non-Destructive Laboratory, and I'm a super senior in electrical engineering. I got licensed in high school. I was, I believe, a junior in 2013. I did it because I was helping out with disaster relief stuff, and it's pretty common for people who do disaster relief stuff to get in amateur radio. We'll talk about that throughout as we go through the question pool. I got my general class license in March of 2013, so fairly quickly after that. And then it took me about a year to get my extra, and I changed my call sign to AA0RN. And we'll talk a little bit about call signs here as well today, actually. Some of my ham radio interests are contesting, talking, digital, software-defined radio, antennas, RF design, and safety. All of these things will be covered and much more. I kind of have a very broad interest in amateur radio. I'll kind of dive into certain areas for a little bit and then go to another area. So these are things I've been interested in at one point. I'd say right now I'm mostly interested in RF design and antennas, but software-defined radio is something I've spent a lot of time on, and safety, obviously, contesting talking. So how many of you feel like you have a good idea of what amateur radio is in here? Yeah, okay. So hopefully by the end of the class, you'll have a vague idea with amateur radio. It's a very broad topic. Amateur radio covers a lot of different things. There's a lot of things you can do with your amateur radio license. You saw the list of things that interest me, and it's pretty broad. I don't know what safety and antennas or safety and RF design have to do with each other. They're very far apart. There's a lot of things you can do with this hobby. So I like to break it down into three very broad categories. That's experimental transmission, hobbyist communications, and safety and disaster relief. I think everything can kind of fall under those three if you break it down with an amateur radio. It's a hobby with a million little hobbies inside. We do a lot of experimental transmission with our club and hobbyist communications. Not as much safety and disaster relief, but there are people who do that. But our club doesn't really focus on that last one. Any questions so far? If you guys ever have questions, I like it when people interject. I like to talk a lot, and you'll see that. I have to have water because my voice is going to get dry a lot when I'm going through this. These whole question pools, we're going to read through all of them, and I'm going to give you background on all of them. So I appreciate when you interject because it gives me a second to listen and to drink a little bit of water. Okay, so this is syllabus. We're going to hit about 70 questions is what I shoot for, or 70 slides per week, and there's about 450 slides. There are some weeks it'll be less, some weeks it'll be a little bit more, but that'll be about the average is 70 slides. That's 70 questions. As we go through this, you're going to have question numbers. We're going to go through the entire question pool, all whatever, 436, something like that, that's in the question pool. We're going to go through each one of those. Each question has a unique identifier. So as we go through this, you can see it on the slide, but and I'll talk about a little bit of studying on your own. I encourage you guys to look at this on your own. So this would be a question number. T1 would be the section, and then the subsection would be A. This is for technician. This is the class we're studying for, technician, amateur radio license. 1 would be the section, A is the subsection, and then the question number. If you guys ever get confused, write that down. Write that down. You can email me. You can post it in our group chat, and I'll give you guys a little bit more information on that. And someone can come back with you with explanations. We do that for everything, whether that be general, extra, whatever. You write that down or you screenshot your phone when you're looking at something, we can do that. It doesn't have to just be technicians. So people who are studying for their general or extra can do that as well. Okay, so how do you study on your own? For technician, if you have an iPhone, I encourage you right now, stop what you're doing, pull your phones out and download either that for your iPhone or for your Android. And if you don't want to do that, which I encourage you to, you can go to hamstudy.org. Hamstudy.org is good because it does a relatively good mobile site. It has good explanations for questions as well, but I think these are handy to have. You can take practice exams on them. We'll talk a little bit about exams as well. So before you show up to an exam, I expect everyone to have taken a practice exam. You can show up every week and you can pay attention, but in addition to that, I really need you guys to know that you're going to pass. So you need to get in the neighborhood of mid 70, 74, I think is what you need to pass. You need to know you're going to pass. So take practice tests before you do that. These apps will help you do that. They also have the entire question pool on them. You can take a practice exam, see your weak points, which section. So if you're really bad at, say, T6, you can go through whole T6 again, hit every question, ask, and go through that, make sure that you don't have a weak point. That is, of course, for all of the technician, the general, and the extra. Has everyone downloaded those apps? Okay.
There's one that says Hem Test Prep and Test Prep New.
New.
I got the.
I did get the new one.
The got 10,000 downloads. The other one's only 1,000.
But get the new one, and the reason why, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is they switch question pools every 4 years. We just had a new question pool, so I haven't seen the entirety of the question pool. It's changed since the last time I went through this class. I've taught this class probably 6 or 7 times. I used to do it twice a semester, now I'm doing it once a semester, and this is the last time I'm officially going to teach it as of right now. So we're going to go through it the whole way. Yeah, these are going to be new questions to me. VE testing, or volunteer examining testing. All the testing is done by volunteers. So I'm one of them. Brad is our local coordinator, and you will get introduced to him when you go to take your exam. We do require pre-registration. The reason we do that is to make sure that we're going to have enough people show up. So if you look here, we have one coming up Thursday. If you guys get inspired, you can study all weekend. Not even all weekend. You can study for 5 or 6 hours, rip through the question pool, and take an exam Thursday, September 20th. No problem. But what you need to do before that is go to our website. I have it here, but on our website, W0EEE.mst.edu, we have the link to that Google form. Fill it out. What we have to have you guys do is get an FRN number. An FRN number is an FCC registration number. It's used instead of your social security number. You will have to get a social security number to get to that. But as a student organization, we don't want to deal with your social security number. So some VE teams will take your social security number and assign you an FRN. We will not do that. If you forget and it comes to the last second and you show up to an exam, and you can show up to an exam if you didn't pre-register, but don't expect it to be there. We didn't get enough people registered, we'll cancel. But if you say showed up to an exam and didn't pre-register for whatever reason, we can sit down with you at a computer and get it, but we don't like to, especially if a lot of people do. It helps us to speed up the process for you to get an FRN number. It takes 2 or 3 minutes. It'll get emailed to you, and it also makes sure that everything gets entered correctly. Many times I've seen people when they're going through and filling out their registration paperwork, put write in bad handwriting, and then the VE team writes it wrong, and then your name's misspelled on your license, and that is a pain to deal with. We don't want that. Do I have any questions on VE testing at all? Here are the dates once again, and it's on your syllabus as well. Okay, so club events. We alternate general meetings, business meetings, and Open Shack every other week. So this week we have an Open Shack. Next week we'll have a business week, our business meeting. Our business meetings, we're trying to shrink our business part down to 20 minutes, and then we try to do some kind of technical presentation of some sort at the end. So if you're interested in learning more about ham radio, that's a good way. Then our Open Shack is a completely different format. We will sometimes, we're going to do a fox hunt, one of the upcoming Open Shacks, not this week, but the week after on Tuesday. We're going to do a fox hunt. We'll talk a little bit about that throughout as well. It's a hidden transmitter on campus. We're going to go find using radio directional finding. So that's a fun event. We will do things like that. We'll play with radios. We'll show you how to work with our radio equipment. You can ask questions. It's pretty loose as far as how it goes. Hello, Nicholas. This is our shack. We've got a pretty good setup. Alumni have donated radios to us. We've got one radio that's worth about 10 grand new, so that's really cool. And then we've got a few that are just slightly under that. Our antenna setup right now is pretty mediocre. We have wired antennas, but that's about to change. We've put about a grand total, over 10 grand in our new antenna setup. We're gonna have a tower climber come up and put up our new directional antennas later on this semester. So if you're getting interested in ham radio, now is the perfect time to join our ham radio club because we're gonna have great antennas. Okay, so all of you should have 2 sheets of paper. One of them is a band plan. We're going to reference that. So if you show up next week, and I hope you all do, make sure to bring that. I don't want to run out of those. I need to order the second set. So please remember to do so. If you absolutely forget, I'll bring a few just in case. But we do like to reference it off and on. Right now, do I have an extra one? Scott, if you take this, as far as technicians go, for most of what you guys will be using, if you were to fold this kind of in this top third here, or well, I guess it's half. If you fold it in half, it works. You will get the frequencies you guys are mostly allowed to use. There are some exceptions to that. So I'd reference it like that. And then all the goodie frequencies, all the fun shortwave frequencies on the back, you guys don't really get to use those until you move on to general or extra. But these are your tech frequencies right here. So that would be everything from 10 meters to 23 centimeters. And then some of the ISM band stuff there. Your radio control people are probably more interested in the stuff that's in the fine text below. Okay, we have our first question. I'm going to ask a lot of these questions. Please interject and give me the answer before I hit the space button. So if you don't, I'll give you the answer, or I'll guess at the answer. I've been known to make a few wrong guesses before, even though I've seen these questions a million times, and you stand in front of people, you forget things. So hopefully you guys know which one the right answer is here. Which agency regulates and enforces amateur radio services in the United States? The FCC. That would be answer C. Many times I'll go through the questions, I'll pause, I'll talk about something slightly on topic, and it'll come up later on. I don't exactly know what slide it'll be talking about, so if you have questions, once again, please interject. Which of the following is a purpose of the amateur radio service as stated in the FCC rules and regulations? It would be C. It's advancing the skills and technical art of communication phases of, it's art is how you think about it. I think they've rephrased it since the last time I saw it, but yeah, art is what you need to pay attention to. For which license classes are new licensing currently available from the FCC? So this question is pointing out that there are several, the novice is currently not a license given out by the FCC. It used to be the first license. It used to have a shorter time that it was available for. I think it was a year before it expired. Technician Plus was also a thing at one time, but currently Technician, General, and Amateur Extra are the only three they are handing out. So the answer is D. How soon after passing the exam may you transmit? So a lot of people will say immediately, and that's not correct with Technician. you've got to wait until it appears in the FCC database. For us, because we do it electronically with the VE team, if you take a test with us, it's going to be pretty quick. We say about 7 days, but in all actuality, it turns out to be less than 24 hours. I've never seen it take more than 24 hours on business days. So if you take them on a Thursday, it'll be issued a Friday, most likely. I'm not allowed to promise that, but I've never seen it not happen. If you take it on a Saturday, it'll be issued Monday morning. So we do it electronically. We're one of the only VE teams, well, definitely in Missouri. I think we're the only one, or one of 2 or 3 that do it electronically. So when I took my amateur radio license, they paper mailed it, and I had to wait 3 weeks before I got a call sign before I could transmit. So if you take your general and your extra, and we'll talk about this at some point, you can transmit on general and extra privileges if you have a technician license right as soon as you take your paper test. You have a year to prove that you did that. So it may still say technician in the FCC database, but if you passed your general that day, you can say your call sign /AG, and I think we'll show that /AG/AG. That'll be a question coming up here
So
soon.
you can take both tests on the same day?
You can take all 3 sitting at once if you wanted to. You could take technician, general, and amateur extra, and it happens. And we even offer it, if you did pretty good on your technician, we'll encourage you to take your general. I've seen people pass it without studying it very much. It does happen. And if you guys are EE students, it is not unreasonable to pass all 3, especially if you're in the senior year. It's about comparable to your senior EE material, especially the general, the extra stuff. The general is very technical as far as rules and regulations. The extra is very technical as far as the math and the electrical engineering side of things. So it's feasible to do all 3 at once. What is the proof of possession of the FCC issued operator license grant? This is a new question. I don't think I've seen it up to now. That is answer C. The control operator primary station license must appear in the FCC ULS database, kind of like the question we had just earlier, before you can, as you prove. So you can send for a paper license. That's not necessarily proof. They don't send paper licenses by default anymore. As of like 2 or 3 years ago, they don't anymore. They used to put it on nice card stock. You don't get those anymore. You can, I think, order it if you ask nicely, but the FCC database is what they go off of, and that's how it is for the entire FCC ULS database, whether that be business band or whatever. They rely on that as their licensee and not paper anymore. How many operator primary license grants may be held by one person? That answer is A, and it's 1. You have 1 license. You may be controller over 1 or 2, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So if you wanted to, you can be the licensee of a club station. That's different. You can't hold an amateur extra for a club license and an amateur general for your own self. So if you have 1 license, it'll be held by yourself. Does that make sense? Okay. So what is the normal term? Does anyone know how long you have your license? It's C. It is 10 years. You get your amateur radio license for 10 years. At that 10-year mark, all you have to do is reapply. You're not going, you just have to make sure that they know you're alive. It's really what this comes down to. You don't have to take an exam unless you've gone past your 2-year mark. And that's the next question here. You have 2 more years, which you can't transmit in that 2 years. And I think that's the next question as well. You can't transmit within those 2 years, but you are allowed to maintain whatever. If you're an amateur extra, you let it expire. You have that 2-year grace period to get it fixed. And then it goes away after that, and you'll have to retest. There are some weird rules that if you took, I know Dr. Kosbart took his technician at some point, I believe in the 70s or 80s, it's probably 70s, late 70s. He took his technician. Because of that, it expired, but there was different rules then. They upgraded him as soon as he got his technician straight to general. He never took his general exam. There's weird rules like that, but for the most part, you will lose your license. You will have to retest all the way through. When is an amateur station required to transmit its assigned call sign? That is that is actually D. People, and I've had this argument with people a lot, including my dad, who's also an amateur radio operator. You don't have to transmit by rules when you immediately start transmitting. It is amateur practice too. You have to do it at least every 10 minutes. And at the end of your communications. So you can start talking, you want to ID as soon as possible, but you don't, the first thing you say doesn't need to be your call sign. But so people will sometimes think it's A, but in fact it is D. It's at every 10 minutes at the end of your communication. I think people might interpret that also as every 10 minutes being at the beginning, but you can start talking within the next 2 to 3 sentences, put your call sign in.
So that would be every 10 minutes, every 10 minutes of the hour.
Mhm.
This is Foxtrot 1, combo check. In Foxtrot 2, I read you, Lima Charlie. Is that the appropriate way?
So the way we'll talk about signing here, and we'll talk about call signs as well. If you have a call, all you need to do is say the call out loud. So you're going to say this is AA0RN, this is W0EEE. That is 100% fine. You can transmit it via Morse if that's what you're talking about. If you're doing a digital mode, you can transmit it via digital mode. But all you need to be doing is it needs to be able to be understood by the masses. So whatever communication protocol you're using, it needs to be used like that.
You're just broadcasting out a transmit only. You're not receiving back. I mean, if those stations are out there receiving or not. Because we have usually Lima Charlie lines, Lima Charlie is line.
I think I know what you're getting at. But one thing I will make a distinction on is in amateur radio, we don't broadcast. We transmit because it's intended for two-way communications between two things. That way they get people from making their own like talk show radio stuff. We don't want that in amateur radio. We want purely communications between some sort. You can communicate with yourself, but you don't want broadcast for the intended public. All you need to do is to identify yourself to whoever you're talking to, or you can talk to yourself if you wanted to. There are some, if you wanted to do like Earth, Moon, Earth communications, talk to yourself, go back and forth, you can put your call sign out there. But for the most part, you're not broadcasting, you're just telling the other person your call sign. So if I picked up my radio here, I'd say, hey, this is AA0RN. In 10 minutes, I'd say it's AA0RN again. And then when I sign off, I'd say this is AA0RN. I'm off the air. You can, or whatever. Does that make sense?
So you're just broadcasting. Well, how do you know that they're receiving your broadcast?
You don't. It's and it's if say you have an issue with your radio and that transmission for whatever reason didn't go through, it's not a big deal. As long as that is your intent to follow the rules with broadcasting your call sign every 10 minutes, you'll be fine.
We would broadcast out to any station reply back as a communication with the child, like reading with the child loud and clear. We're talking.
Yeah.
That's it. It's a combo check. That's all.
Yeah, you're making sure that people know who you are.
Right.
That is its intended. But as far as broadcasting, I'd say transmitting. I'll say broadcasting. When I say broadcasting, mostly I mean transmitting, and that's a distinction I'll make throughout this question pool. I did not mean to do that. When may an amateur station transmit without on-the-air identification? You would think probably never, but there is one exception to that, and our radio control people should know that, and that's D. So control model craft, and this is a newer rule. I'm newer within the last 5 to 10 years. What you have to do for this, and I think this is the upcoming question, is you can put your call sign in writing on your radio control craft, and both on your receiver and your transmitter to make sure that you're identifying. So some of those protocols won't allow for you to put your call sign in it, and that is the reason why. And say we got this Chinese transmitter that overlaps with the ham radio band that they made. We use it in the US. To let people use those legally, we let them get their amateur radio call sign and stick it on there instead of not giving them a way to legally use it. Does that make sense? That is really the only exception to not transmitting your call sign. And it's a one of those weird memorization things. we'll come across some of those. My intention was to put a little star. I didn't get to it for all the memorization questions. Maybe if I teach the course again, I'll do that.
The reason for that is the drones, we have, for us out the drone, we're supposed to be, technically have a ham radio license.
Yeah. That's it.
Not to fly it, but if you use first person view,
Well,
so you're using video link, then you do. But just to have a model and fly it, you don't need it.
If it's transmitting on amateur radio call band frequencies with amateur radio power, so FPV would be a one of those use cases where it would use amateur radio frequencies in amateur radio power. You have to do that. I know there are some other exceptions that you want to use high power to transmit to your RC stuff. You're going to want to do that as well. So if you're ever using amateur privileges for an RC, that's where that falls under too.
Just where do those wavelengths fall into on first person view stuff?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
5.8 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz. Typically, there's some others, but that's the general.
So now we're going to get into some more of the nitty gritties of call sign. I'm going to take a second break from the questions here to kind of explain call sign format. We've got our basic call sign format, and I'll mostly just focus on the US. There are some weird exceptions for other countries, but we have something called a 2x3 call sign. We have a 1x3. We have a 2x2. We have a 1x2 and a 2x1 in a special case of a 1x1. So go over here. Hopefully you guys can see it all, and it's still on camera here. So this format refers to purely the letters in your call sign. Can anyone tell me what AA0RN is in one of these? It'd be a 2x2. So 2 letters in the prefix, 2 letters in the suffix. So the prefix would be before the number, suffix being after the number. So if you guys are given a call sign, you're in the KEs now, so Kilo Echo. We are in Missouri, and if you look at the back of your band plan here, that's a 0 call sign. So wherever your listed address is, if some of you are from out of town, if you're from, say, Oklahoma, you'll get a 5. If that's what you put down on your call sign, that's where you live, is your current address, you'll get a 5 in your call sign. But if you live in the state of Missouri, you're going to get a K. And right now they're giving sequentially KEs out. Was KD before that? I got a KD call. They're giving KE0. I can't tell you what they're on now. They're towards the end of the alphabet as far as what this one is, and what this one is, and what this one is.
I'm gonna have to cut out here in a moment for another meeting, but is there a way I can see some of the other slides?
So I am putting this all on my YouTube page. So you just search my name, Aaron Dudes, and my call sign's on there too. So we're live streaming. Hopefully we're getting audio. It sounds like we are. So you can do that. And if you guys can't make it to all of this, that's totally fine. Come when you can. Ask questions when you can. But there's also the apps on your phone, and that's a good way to study and make that up. So you can totally watch that. I can't technically give these slides out because I stole them from another organization, and then their prefix for taking this, they're like, you can't hand these out. So
You do know your telepath, right?
yeah, well, no, I'm allowed to use them. I'm just not allowed to hand them to students.
Oh, okay.
That's
So you're going on YouTube, you're streaming live on YouTube?
Yes.
So like if we miss
Yeah.
next Thursday, we
Yeah.
can, what was the name?
just search my name and my call sign, and it'll come up. Okay. So, like I was saying, a 2x3 is what you will get. That is called a sequential call sign because it is sequentially given. So if the last that we'll have, say, we'll say we're on A, B, C sequentially, the next thing we would get here is KE0, A, B, D, so on and so forth, all the way down. And that's how they give call signs out. They skip a few, they look out for profanity to make sure that nothing slips by, and they won't give that, but that's how they go through, is they look at that and they will go through. You can get something called a vanity call sign, and a vanity call sign is something you pick out. You look at it, you say it's open and it fits within the US rules. So within the US rules, other than this format here, you've got to look out for these letters in your prefix. In America, we get K, we get W, we get N, and we get AA through AK. Some of those are reserved, so if you live in the Bahamas, you get a certain, it's probably a K call, so you can't get some of those, but that's the general rule. It needs to start with a K and then a W or an AA through AK. AA through AK are advanced and extra only call signs. The other thing to look for is, for you guys, is these call signs right here, a 2x3 and a 1x3 are the only thing you're allowed to get as technicians. So you'll be given a 2x3. As a technician, you can select a 1x3. To get these call signs, you have to be an extra. Now, the special case is the 1x1. The 1x1 would be, I've operated as N0 Y, and November 0 Yankee. That is a special event call sign. You can select those. They have a given period of time that they're allowed to be used. So it so happens that the people who organize the VEs, the volunteer examiners, so we're under the W0EEE, can hand out these special event call signs, and they'll give them to you for 30 days. The ARRL, right here, they are an organization that can do it as well. You apply for it, they give it to you, you have it for 30 days, you give it up. It's usually for contests or special events. So I did it for the Kansas QSO party. I operated, so the one of the little things you could do as part of the party, the Kansas QSO party, was they were trying to have you spell different words like sunflower or Kansas, and I can't remember why they needed a Y, but it was for one of the things you spelled if you talk to that person. Weird thing you're not going to probably run into, but that's why I used November 0 Yankee. Anyone have a question? So, vanity call sign. We know that vanity call signs are anything that's not a sequential call sign. Now, who can select a vanity call sign is this question. So that is, anyone can, it's on first come, first served basis. Anyone can do that. It doesn't matter who you are, but you have limitations based on what class of license you will fall into. Okay, so looking at this format, which call signs are valid in the U.S.?
C.
I'd say C.
It's actually just, sorry, technician. I stated that wrong. All of those are valid within the U.S. So that's how you're looking at it. The technician is the important part to pay attention here. So A is the only one that you could pick as a technician. The other are reserved for amateur extra. Okay, so you've heard me a little bit say phonophetics. Phonophetics would be Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta Echo Foxtrot all the way down. We use the NATO standard. Some people use their own made-up standard. Doesn't really matter. It will get on some people's nerves if you use a made-up phonophetics. Let me think. People use Norway for N sometimes instead of November. So things like that. There's a lot of made-up amateur radio ones that people use. But phonophetics help in making contacts, especially weak signal propagation contacts, where it's hard to hear sometimes, and letters kind of sound alike. They rhyme with each other or they sound very similar. All the phonophetics have distinct sounds, and they're designed to be that way. And that's why we use them. So it's not required by any means, but we use them, and we especially use them with weak signal propagation. When we talk about mostly the frequencies you guys would be operating on, we don't use them very much. But in shortwave radio, they're kind of standard. So it's encouraged, but it's not required. That's what this question is saying. Which of the following is a requirement for the to issue a club station license grant? So to issue you have to have 4 members sign it. I think it's actually 3 when you go there. They say you have to have 4, but when you sign a club license, to get a club license, you have to have 3 people on the paper, but 4 people in your club. So W0EEE is our club call sign. It's what we use on our repeater. It's what we use when we're in the radio room. It's been our call sign since I believe the switch was in probably the 40s or 50s. We used to have W9 DUM. We changed it. That would have been in the early 30s. I think 31 we got W9 DUM. We changed it to W9 EEE. The FCC changed everyone who was in the Midwest from 9 to 0. So we went to W0EEE. And that's how we got that call sign. That call sign is, if you look it up in the FCC database, held by one person. He is Dr. Norman Cox. He is a retired professor. The university used to be one of our advisors, but he's an amateur extra, and he holds that call sign for us. You can hand that down from person to person, and that's been handed down from person to person. He is who currently is the trustee of that call sign. And we'll get into some of that verbiage here in a minute. When using tactical identifiers such as race headquarters during community service net operation, how often must your station transmit the station's FCC assigned call sign? So say you're operating a race, we do public service events a lot in amateur radio, and you call yourself race headquarters. What's the rule? Can you call yourself race headquarters every time you have your 10 minutes? You gotta use your FCC. You gotta do it same every time. It's same as the normal rule. It's at the end of communication and every 10 minutes during a communication. So it's essentially the same question we asked earlier, just emphasizing that race headquarters is not your call sign. Which of the following?
The end of that said along with your tactical location. So
If
you have to
needed.
identify both at the same time.
You don't have to identify your tactical call sign unless that's with the organization that you're working for once. And by working, amateur radio is purely volunteer. You can't make any money off of it. There's one exception, and we'll get to that. But yes, yeah, you know, is whatever they want you to do, plus your call sign is what it's emphasizing.
See.
Which of the following is acceptable language to use for station identification when using in a subphone band? That is the English language only. So only English can be used when transmitting your call sign phone. So if you're transmitting using a digital protocol, like your ones and zeros aren't necessarily English until they're being read out loud, or if you look at your call sign, that's it's not necessarily needs to be in English, but it needs to be used the same letters. So if you're using phone, you're talking, it needs to be in English. We talked about this earlier. That is, all choices are correct. So if you're using a slant something, so if you upgrade to generals after you take your technician and you have your call sign, you can say slant AG, advanced to general, / AE, advanced to extra. You can say slant, stroke, it doesn't matter. They're all the same thing. The ITU, does anyone know what the ITU is? And it's operated by the UN. Yeah, the UN is the governing body over the ITU. I apologize, and I meant to talk about this at the beginning of this. I cram all of the technical rules into the first, and the reason I do that is this is the stuff that you probably will need the most context, it's the most memorization. So I will have 100% more people here, or there will be more people at this than there will be. I know people will have tests and stuff, can't make it to every meeting, or they'll decide to study on their own. The reason I go through the more boring questions on the first day is to make sure you got that down. All the rest is technical, and if you're an engineering student, it's not going to be a big deal. So, so if you think these questions are boring, I think they're also boring, but they're also necessary to get through. With which countries are the FCC licensed amateur radio stations prohibited from exchanging communications with? So I think right now there's only one country that falls under this, and it's not North Korea, believe it or not.
That's what I was thinking.
It's not. It's Namibia. Namibia is in Africa. And for whatever reason, they don't issue amateur radio, and they outlawed it for whatever reason. I don't know if that's currently the only country, but I knew at one point that was the only country.
Two countries.
Does it say 2 countries?
Right.
Oh,
Oh.
And this is the.
I'm incorrect. So I've been saying Namibia forever, and I haven't had those bottom parts of the slide. So I disagree with them. The North Korea has issued amateur radio call signs in the past. They may not do it all the time, but they have had people come in and operate from North Korea, so that is wrong.
So they have to tell the ITU, we're not talking to you.
Mm-hmm. The other country I think is in Africa. I think I just remembered it incorrect, and I've been saying it incorrect for a long time. So I'm gonna have to rememorize that if I teach this class again. So, what types of international communications are permitted? So, what you're allowed to talk about is personal remarks of characters, the kind of key word you're looking for there. That's the only one that comes up. Communication incidental to the purposes of amateur radio, I believe, is, and remarks of personal character is the correct answer there. So, yeah, even when we were under the no talking to Cuba thing, we were still allowed to talk to them on amateur radio. That was one of the first contacts I made internationally, was Cuba. So you could talk to North Korea if they allowed it. So there's really no ban on who you can talk to, even if your countries don't get along. As long as they have told the ITU they can talk, you can talk. What is meant by the term third-party communications? Third-party communications is someone who is not a licensed person, but he's using amateur radio services. So if I was to hand Kyle up here a ham radio and let him transmit using my call sign, he'd be a third party. I am the control operator, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. So he's using my station. Wherever I'm at, and I have a radio as my station, and he's using my call sign. He's allowed to do that as long as I am in control of the radio. So I can't have him take my radio and go in the other room and make a contact. I'm out of control. So I can't have him take my radio and go in the other room and make a contact. I'm out of control at that point. So I need to be the control operator at some point. And if you're a club, you can hand off the control of a call sign to someone else. So W0EEE, Dr. Norman Cox isn't standing there above us every time we transmit. He couldn't be. So if I am an amateur extra, which I am, and I'm using the W0EEE call sign, I am allowed to use that call sign without him present. That makes sense. Any questions? So control operator, station licensee, those are distinctions there. They're terms you need to know, and you'll hear them here. And if you need clarifying or you forget what they are, just ask me. Which of the following restrictions apply when a non-licensed person is allowed to speak to a foreign station using a station under the control of a technician class control operator? This doesn't happen very often. It's very difficult for this circumstance to happen just because of what frequencies you guys are allowed to use. But in this case, and I think this is a new question, so I don't remember it, as long as the third-party agreement is allowed to do that, you're allowed to do that. So they have a third-party agreement between countries, you're allowed to do that. I vaguely remember this, but I'm not sure if it was in the last question pool. When are you allowed to operate your amateur station in a foreign country? Anyone know?
Only if the country allows it.
Yeah, it's when they authorize it. So there are different standards for different countries. I think in Canada, they'll let you use your technician license as long as you're using their technician rules or their equivalent technician. But if you want to be able to use it in pretty much all the countries in Europe, you get an amateur extra, and they'll let you do as long as you're following their rules. So one of the graduate students, or I think his postdoc, he came from Ukraine, for a while, he used his call sign in America. And the way he was allowed to do that legally is his call sign was US2IPQ. And they let him use it in America. I think he had the equivalent of a general in Ukraine. He had to say, I think it was the beginning, he had to say W stroke US2IPQ. So he was allowed to use it in America. So there's weird rules. You just look it up before you go to the other country to make sure you can operate.
I have a question on that. Where do you go to look this kind of information up?
I would say the biggest place to find this kind of information is the ARRL, the American Radio Relay League, is probably the best part to get this kind of information if you were interested in it. And with some odd countries, small countries, you're gonna have to look through their rules and laws. And I was doing some of that. I was really curious to see if I could, because in America you can get a license outside of the U.S. even if you're not a U.S. citizen. You can apply for an amateur radio call sign if you're in another country as long as there's a VE team. So I was curious if I could get a call sign for a country remotely, mail something in, and I dug through databases like that for a while and couldn't find anything. So I'm going to stick with just having the U.S. call sign for now. Most of them require you to have a green card or something, or the equivalent of a green card before you get it. But in the U.S. we don't. From which of the following locations may an FCC licensed amateur station transmit? And that is, where's this guy? Can't read it. It's blending in. The FCC rules. Answer D. From a vessel. Okay, so here's the last question. Cool. So I flipped it. I liked the old version better. It made more sense to me. You can transmit the international waters. Whatever flag you have up is what call sign you use up. So if you're flying under a U.S. boat, that's what you'd use a U.S. call sign. So those are the rules for international waters. And I don't know why they didn't say that about that. I think that's more important if you're in international waters. You also have to have permission from the captain before you can transmit. And that also applies to, you can transmit from a plane as well. You just have to have the pilot's permission. Fundamental facts. Okay, so I talked a little bit about control operator. We're going to get into more of that verbiage here. Hopefully we'll get through it. It's taking a little bit more time than I anticipated. Slide number 37. Whew. We're gonna try to go through here quickly. I was hoping to get through a little bit more. Hoping to get through 60. So we may go 5 minutes over, and if you have to leave, that's totally fine. When is an amateur station permitted to transmit without a control operator? That is never. You always have to have a control operator of some sort. Control operator can be someone other than the station licensee. Station licensee is who's in the FCC database. You can hand that control operator to someone else with the permission of the station licensee. Who may be the control operator of a station communicating through an amateur satellite or space station? That's anyone who can talk over those frequencies. So if you're permitted to talk on the frequencies of the satellite, you're allowed to be the control operator of the satellite. Who must designate the station control operator? That's the station licensee, as I said. When the control operator is not the station licensee, who is responsible? You want to have any idea? If FCC rules are broken, who's responsible? Both people. It'd be both people are equally responsible if you're breaking rules. And we'll talk a little bit more about rules. And I was hoping to get through some rules here. There's not many of these questions, and we'll get to rules. What determines the transmitting privileges of an amateur station? It's whoever the control operator is of that station. So not station licensee, but control operator. There's a distinction there once again. So whoever's in control of it. In general practice is, if I wanted to help a technician use my privileges and I'm an amateur extra, they can use their call sign / my call sign on extra class privileges. So, but they're using their call sign. When under normal circumstances, may a technician class license be control operator of the station? operating in exclusively amateur extra class operators segment of the amateur bands. That's at no time. That you have to, whoever is the control operator is who's the license privileges that falls under, like they've been hitting at. What is the control point? The control point is where the station is being transmitted from. There's a few different kinds of control. There's local control, there's a remote control, and there's auxiliary control. And we'll talk a little bit about each of those. Automatic control or auxiliary control are things that follow FCC, are programmed to follow FCC rules. So our repeater is under automatic control. It transmits the W0EEE call sign every time it's activated. So I have it programmed to our repeater here. This is AA0RN test. Should come back here. Unless it's already been activated. There we go. And brings the W0EEE call sign up. That's on top of TJ, and we'll talk a little bit more about repeaters here in a few weeks. I believe that's week 3. So that's automatic control. A repeater operation is something under automatic control. There's a few others.
What is TJ?
TJ, Thomas Jefferson Hall, the big building over there.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm thinking everyone in here is
I've been
students,
through the building.
so yeah. Which of the following is an example of remote control as defined by Part 97? Part 97 is what holds all the rules and regulations for amateur. So they'll ask you that. That's one of the questions at some point. Is Part 97 is something important to remember. And there's obviously subparts to that define each thing. They say every good amateur has a copy of Part 97 rules, but it reads like a lawyer wrote it, which they probably did. So it's not the easiest thing to read. They say you should have one in your shack. I don't think I have one in mine, or the club has one in theirs, but that's something you have to know as Part 97. Remote control is defined by Part 97. Defined by Part 97 is answer B. That's operating the station over the internet would be remote control. You could also operate it over telephone lines. That used to be a thing. You could phone patch into your repeater and control it that way. That's not really a thing anymore, but that's another example of remote control. Which of the following is true of remote control operation? The control operator must be at the control point so you can't, if you're controlling it if I'm controlling my radio from my laptop, I have to be at my laptop. I can't let someone else use my control. So that the control operator always has to be at the control point, wherever the control point is. A control operator is required at all times. That's not necessarily true for automatic control, but it is true for remote control. The control operator indirectly manipulates the controls. So they have some sort of, they can turn the radio off if they need to. So you can set up a radio for remote control pretty easily nowadays, but
Is this
becoming more and
only
more
on
common.
radios, or is that also like from the laptop?
You can, so if I set my radio up, I can control it with a computer hooked up to a radio, and a lot of radios now have computers built into them.
So if you're doing a remote control operation and you step away, you need to sign out, and if somebody else wants to use your laptop, they have to sign in?
So if, say I have my radio here hooked up to a laptop in the other room. If I'm at the control point and I'm using my call sign into this radio, I have to be at the control point. Something you guys need to think about, and it's different than most things in the FCC world, is you are the station. Your radio is not the station. So when you say station, you got to not think about the physical hardware of it. If I pick up someone else's radio that doesn't belong to me, I am the station. So that's a kind of distinction. A lot of times in the FCC world, the actual hardware is certified to be the station. You as the person are operated to be the station.
Okay, a station's not a fixed point, it could be in the air any place.
Yeah. A station is anywhere from which you are transmitting. You can be transmitting from afar, you can be transmitting near. Does that make sense?
On these repeaters,
Repeaters are different. Repeaters are set up to follow FCC rules and regulations, so they transmit every 10 minutes or more often. So if we were to listen for another 3 or 4 minutes to the repeater, it would ID again. If I was to sit on my radio accidentally for 2 minutes, it'll shut itself off, so it won't transmit without doing that. So it knows to turn itself off. Rules like that. So there are heavier restrictions. And we'll talk about interference. There's heavier restrictions on repeater
the
control.
repeater doesn't have to be in a fixed location though, right? 'Cause we
Not
put-
necessarily.
We put them in a helicopter, and that's.
Yeah, no. You get into some more coordination mess. Repeaters, you want to generally have coordinated through a local coordinator, and we'll talk about that during the repeater section. But I don't want to spend too much time on that because we are going to talk about coordination. But yeah, from the FCC rules and regulations, that is a correct statement. Who does the FCC presume to be the control operator of an amateur station unless documented to the contrary in the station records? That is the station licensee. In which of the following circumstances may the control operator of an amateur station receive compensation for operating that station? That is answer B, when it is incidental to classroom instruction. That is more of a new rule that they've implemented, so teachers can, who are at work, can show ham radio when they're talking about STEM stuff. So if you're a teacher on salary and you want to show ham radio, that is something you're allowed to do, but that is the only exception to that.
How does that mean, like, if you're at work, you can't?
If you're at work,
Friends or something?
if you're at work and you're making a work-related transmission through your radio, that is not allowed. If you're on the clock or taking a break and you're technically at work and you're using your radio for non-work purposes, you're not in trouble. And you're using your radio for non-work purposes, you're not in trouble. And that's only transmitting. You can receive whatever you'd like. Who is accountable should the repeater inadvertently retransmit communications that violate the FCC rules? You might think that they might be equally responsible, but it's the originating station that is in trouble. So occasionally, and I say occasionally, if it does happen, people will break FCC rules, like not use their call sign or curse on the repeater. The person who's in control of the repeater, who is the station licensee of the repeater, is not going to get in trouble for that. That's the person who made their transmission.
The original transmission.
The original transmission, the originating. We're going to try to get through as many rules as possible. I was hoping to get to, I think, slide 60, so maybe 10 slides, and we'll wrap it up. If you have to go, that's totally fine. I know IEEE has something at 6. You can watch this if you need to, but also there's the phone app as well. So I'm going to continue, but feel free to duck out. I'm not going to be too much longer. What, if any, are the restrictions concerning transmission of language that may be considered indecent or obscene? Those are prohibited. They're not allowed. So if you think it's a bad word, don't use it, is essentially, or you think someone else thinks it's a bad word, don't use it. There have been slip-ups and mess-ups, and I have been one who has been an originating station of a transmission that probably would have violated FCC. But if you don't make a general habit out of it and it's an accident, it's not going to be the end of the world, but those are the rules. When is willful interference to other amateur stations prohibited? Jamming of any sort or interference of any sort is illegal, period. You know, you have, for a while they were putting those boxes in classrooms that would take out cell phone transmissions and block that. Totally illegal. Totally illegal.
Say that again.
Yeah.
So I know, like, for a while, classrooms were trying to put cell phone blockers so people wouldn't be able to use their cell phones during classrooms. 100% illegal. They got in big trouble for doing that. Yeah, even if, because they can cause severe damage during public safety events. Yeah, you are not allowed to block any kind of transmission of any sort. There's no exception to that throughout the
There's
FCC rules.
no exception at all.
I cannot think of one. No one's been able to tell me.
I've been in places, where when I was in the Army, I'd go to a place and all of a sudden you had nothing. Nobody had it.
I mean, if you're talking about military, that's different.
Okay.
But within the U.S., as far as what the FCC regulates, you are not allowed to do that. People were doing GPS blockers to block their people from tracking them GPS. Totally can go to prison for that.
Not the law enforcement been caught doing that and they.
Got in trouble.
Yeah, they're not, I think the Supreme Court rule or something came out on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely not allowed to block anything. So that falls under that as well. Interference is not okay.
Other than military.
Yeah, and especially within U.S. Soil. Under which of the following circumstances may the amateur radio station make a one-way transmission? That's when, answer B, when transmitting code practice, information bulletins, or transmits necessary to provide emergency communications. That it always goes back to we don't make broadcasts, we make transmissions. Broadcasts are a completely different animal, and we don't use broadcasts in amateur radio. We don't broadcast, we transmit.
So if you're talking and nobody's responding, that's different than you just holding the mic down
If
and
you're
having a monologue.
if the intent is for the public consumption, that is broadcasting. So if you're having a monologue on the radio that's meant to try to talk to someone else, to an individual, that's fine. But if it's meant for public consumption, that's not.
Like your talk show host.
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some like gray area in there, but they try to do that to get people from not making their own high-powered transmission station in which they can say whatever they want and just blabber on. I just wonder which is transmitted related to broadcast. Emergency news gathering is okay. So answer A. Only where such communications directly relate to immediate safety of human life and protection is where you can, related to broadcasting, you can rebroadcast something. It's been safety. Whenever there's like a big, like this is a no-no, and we break it, usually it's if it's gonna protect humans or property, that's acceptable to break the rule. Essentially, is how you think about it. There's a few rules like that.
Is there a board seeing that, like we use flash
No,
message and boy, everything stops?
you can say words like that but as far as FCC rules go, there is not necessarily. You can say emergency or break, and that's used heavily. And I think there's even a question about it. But as far as FCC rules go, there's not really necessarily a given thing that gives that. But as amateur practices go, if you say break or emergency, people will stop and listen to whatever you have to say. So that is amateur practice. And a lot of things come down to amateur practice, and even the rules will point back to follow amateur practice. There's lots of things you could do that would cause issues if you didn't follow amateur practice but aren't against the FCC rules. When is it okay to encode or hide messages? This also includes encryption for people who do that kind of thing. It's only when you are doing radio control craft, satellites. You really don't want to have your satellite available to be able to move your satellite in space and use your thrust power. You don't want to have that open to the public so anyone can transmit on it. So you can't encrypt that. That is the only time. Or if it's control commands for even you can put a password on if you have a repeater that you want to be able to emergency shut down if it has an issue. I know people were doing for a long time telepatch into their phone, so they call it up, they call the repeater up, it's hooked up to a phone jack, and they can emergency shut it down remotely. They can put a password on that. That is acceptable. Under what conditions is an amateur station authorized to transmit music using a phone emission? When it's incidental, this is a weird rule, and I'll give you some background to this. And it doesn't really apply anymore, but it's still in the books. So if it's incidental to authorized retransmissions of space communications, is when you're allowed to retransmit music. So using single sideband or AM or FM, The reason they do that is the wake-up call on the ISS used to be retransmitted by amateur radio operators. And in fact, on the ISS, the amateur radio is their backup system. So that's a rule in there, but that's the only time you can transmit music. And I don't think singing is allowed either. I've had people ask that before too. I'm gonna try to get, so I remember what slide we're on, 2 more slides here, so we end at 60. When may an amateur radio operator use the station to notify amateurs of the availability of equipment or sale? You can actually do this. A lot of people would think that's probably not allowed. You probably can't make money off of amateur radio. As long as you're not doing it on a regular basis, it's an amateur piece of equipment. They have swap nets sometimes. People talk on the radio about swapping nets, swapping gear. You can talk about that. That's not a big deal. This will be our last slide and I'll wrap up. When must the station licensee make the station and its records available? Anytime the FCC asks. I'm gonna, with that, wrap it up. And remember that we started on 60 and that's where we will start next week. And hopefully we can keep a pretty good pace here. There will be some weeks especially when we go through Ohm's law, that'll go a little bit faster. But if you guys need help at any point, once again, we'll have a review day. We'll also, if we kind of have extra slides we can get through, we'll hit those on the review day as well.
Hey, what's your name?
Aaron.
Don't forget, breakthrough.
Oh, you're the one that sent me
Right
out
out
there.
there, dig out.
That's your phone.
You're the one that sent me.
Back with for breakfast.
No,